We go now live to the Zellerbach Auditorium at the University of California with the Berkeley Symphony, and your host is Charles Amerkanian.
You described yourself through the media. The media said that this guy's a deranged comedian. I mean, perhaps the sort of classical music world and the conductors who approached you were intrigued by the idea of a deranged comedian writing classical music, but something held their attention once they saw the music. What was it in the craftsmanship of your work that would intrigue somebody like Pierre Boulez and Kent Nagano?
I don't know what it is specifically they liked about it, but there's one thing about these pieces: you can't fake your way through them. There's no way that you can't hide. You either play it right or you play it wrong.
Welcome to Zellerbach Auditorium on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley, for a concert of music for a large orchestra by Frank Zappa, performed by the Berkeley Symphony Orchestra. Kent Nagano, the symphony's music director, will be on the podium as we hear the American premieres of 3 pieces and the world premiere of a 4th, played by a massive orchestra of 111 musicians. I'm Charles Amerkanian, music director of KPFA, along with Catherine Lumens, executive producer of radio station KQED-FM in San Francisco.
Well, our program opens tonight with Bob and Dacron's Sad Jane. Then we'll hear the more extended work Moe and Herd's Vacation. Then both of these works, of course, are American premiere performances. And then we will hear the world premiere of Sinister Footwear, a work in 3 movements and one of Zappa's most difficult. And to close, we'll hear Pedro's Dowry, another American premiere.
Tonight's broadcast is a production of KQED-FM San Francisco in cooperation with KPFA-FM in Berkeley.
Now, Charles, I should mention that this is the 5th and the final program of the 1983-84 Berkeley Symphony season. And this program, as all of the concerts of the Berkeley Symphony this past year, will be heard by delayed broadcast over KQED-FM. And this particular broadcast will air on Monday, August 13th at 8 p.m.
Catherine, this really is an historic evening for the Berkeley Symphony. We've got a massive ensemble on stage, the bigger-than-life-size puppets of John Gilkerson and the San Francisco Miniature Theater, a troupe of hand-picked dancers operating these puppets in choreography by Tandy Beale and Joan Lazarus, and an investment of thousands of hours in rehearsals, which were demanded by Frank Zappa before he'd let any orchestra play his music.
That's absolutely right, and I think it's also fair to mention and fair to state that Kent Nagano, I'm sure, would and did demand every one of those hours of rehearsal from his orchestra before he would present it, because he is indeed a perfectionist, as is Frank Zappa, and as Kent says, that's one of the reasons that they work so well together.
I loved watching them in rehearsal because Kent is so precise about rehearsal cues and going over and over particular passages where he heard minute details that were out of sync, and Frank, from the audience, seemed to watch the overall proceedings and the staging and have a number of really fascinating ideas to loosen up the dancers and to make the choreography even more strange and bizarre.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I got the impression from talking to Kent this past week that Frank had a similar impact on the polishing of the music. One thing that I found fascinating was the fact that Kent said he harassed Frank to come to the rehearsals. This started, about 2 weeks ago. And then once Frank was there, Kent had the orchestra play the things that were the most ragged. He didn't want Frank to just hear what was polished at any given time. He wanted him to hear the worst so that he himself could be a part of the solution and offer suggestions, because as we've alluded, this music is extremely difficult, and we'll be going more into the specifics of that and the difficulties of it later on.
Frank Zappa has been writing orchestra music since he was 14 years old, but he's never heard his orchestra music really properly until last year when Kent Nagano went to London to record some of these pieces you'll hear tonight with the London Symphony Orchestra, and these recordings have been released on Zappa's own label, Barking Pumpkin. But in addition to these,
great label.
In addition to these 4 or 5 pieces, he has produced a body of works that includes 203 songs, 35 record album releases in the pop and rock field. Many of them are double and triple record sets, 91 instrumental works, 32 compositions for orchestra and choral groups, 4 ballets, 2 feature films, and 2 television specials.
That's amazing. I think most people have no idea that he has that much to his credit.
He doesn't sleep an awful lot. He seems to be the kind of person who simply works all the time and is very dedicated to the production of these pieces and to doing them as best he can. And I have talked with musicians who have played with him, and they're astounded at what they can come up with just because he demands it. And they work at it, and they finally get it. And many people say he's one of the great musicians of our time.
Well, Kent said, too, that quite often we're going to have to apologize to our listeners for this amazing noise that happens in this booth periodically. It's not part of Zappa's music, believe us. What I was going to say is that Kent was particularly impressed with the extent to which Frank knows his own music inside and out, and that's not always the case with premier music. Kent was really inspired to find that Frank knew exactly what was supposed to happen where and could help be part of the solution. You know, one thing that I think we should do, Charles, before we launch into the music is give our listeners a sense of what it looks like down there, because I have never seen Zellerbach so packed full of musicians in the pit.
The orchestra completely takes up the entire pit, but then rolls up onto the stage on the left side with string basses, harp, own martineau, and piano, among other electrified instruments. And then on the right-hand side, 8 percussionists, about 4 of them actually on the stage with the timpanist alone having 6 timpani. It's an amazing ensemble, and you will hear in this music that the orchestration is really a lot of the fun of Frank Zappa's music.
That is true. Now, there are 112 musicians of this orchestra. The regular musicians of the Berkeley Symphony, of course, plus musicians taken from the Oakland Symphony Orchestra, I understand, the Oakland Symphony Ballet Orchestra, and other orchestras around the area. Kent was pleased to be able to say that despite the unusual instrumentation of some of these Zappa works, and despite the real virtuosity required, he wasn't afraid when he saw the score. He looked at it, and given the repertoire that the Berkeley Symphony has played over the past several seasons, they were pretty well equipped to jump into it.
It's a great ensemble, and they do play a lot of music that involves electronics and large orchestrations, the Messiaen pieces, which have made the orchestra famous among them. And we're very excited that we're being able to cooperate with KQED and bringing this music to you this evening over KPFA. The first piece is called Bob in Dacron, Sad Jane. It's really 2 different pieces, and the choreography is not to be believed. It's a sad thing that this is not on television.
It's sad, and yet if it were, I think we'd be hard-pressed to stay on the air after it aired. There is some pretty amazing stuff going on stage. Frank Zappa will be out in just a few minutes to talk about the music itself, so there isn't a great deal that we have to do there. But we should say that the puppeteers and some of the visuals going on in this production are quite striking. The amazing costumes that Bob puts on are really a laugh. The puppets that come out as part of the visualization of the ideal women are very striking. They move along, well, in a very funny way.
The stage set at the beginning has a couple of racks of clothing that Frank Zappa will talk about, but suffice it to say that it looks like they've raided a thrift store in Central Texas, and you will see the most bald and bold plaid coats in bright reds and greens that have ever been collected. And this man who dresses up in polyester to catch a girlfriend has a real repertoire from which he can choose, and you'll hear laughter throughout the orchestra music, which is one thing that Frank says has made him happy about seeing people laugh at an orchestra concert.
Yeah.
He said it should have happened a long time ago.
So as you listen to this, you can certainly let your imagination run wild. I don't think you run any risk of letting it go too wild.
No, and the odd thing is that a lot of the music sounds quite serious and not at all satirical or humorous. It sounds very much like Zappa, as he said on some occasions, has been influenced by Edgar Varese and many other 20th century masters, including Boulez and Stockhausen. And this, mixed with his rock and roll background, has created a unique mix, which is a pleasure to hear.
I don't know how much detail Frank will go into. Let me just run down the list of characters here in case he doesn't hit them all. We have, of course, Bob, then the 3 imaginary women, Dolly, Olivia, Flash, a tennis instructor, a doctor, a shoeshine boy, a bartender, and then the mysterious Jane, bag lady turned something else, and I think you'll hear about that later on. All of these controlled by a number of live dancers, in many cases more than one dancer to a puppet. Quite an amazing feat of staging, and here is Frank Zappa.